Rescue Dog, and yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there and welcome to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week. And coming up today, plenty of fast-paced news as usual from 4 until 6. And this next hour, a new report by MPs warning that the NHS in England is facing the worst staffing crisis in its history. Well, that report by the Commons Health and Social Care Committee says that unfilled vacancies are now posing a serious risk to patient safety. We'll be speaking to a professor of oncology who says the government has missed years of warnings that this recruitment crisis was looming. Also coming up this afternoon, Sir Keir Starmer has set out his economic priorities if his party wins the next general election.
There is no task more central to my ambitions for Britain than making the country and its people better off.
Well, the Labour leader claimed his plan was all about growth and that net zero was still a key component. We'll have analysis with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. And hasta la vista, baby? Yes, the last words of Boris Johnson at his final Prime Minister's questions last week. Could it really be the final page for Boris, or is there another chapter to be written? Reports over the weekend claim the Prime Minister believes he will be back in number 10 within 12 months. And more than 10,000 Tory members have signed a petition calling for his name to be added to this current final round of the leadership contest. So, in our debate this hour, we'll be asking, could we be bringing Boris back? And joining us for the next 2 hours too, former Transport Minister Norman Baker with his view on that. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. Appeal court judges say they'll put on hold the ending of Archie Battersby's treatment for 48 hours to allow his parents time to approach the European Court. They had ruled doctors could lawfully stop providing life support treatment. The 12-year-old, who's being treated at the Royal London Hospital, hasn't regained consciousness since suffering an accident at home 3 months ago. His parents were appealing an earlier High Court ruling which upheld doctors' conclusions that he was brain dead. Archie's mother, Holly, told GB News she's still in fight or flight mode.
We realise that we are coming to an end now, but like I said from day one, I will fight to get my little boy time. I just think it's a shame that the whole family and close friends have had to go through all of this traumatic experience, to do it. If it comes down to funding, the amount of that it's taken or cost the NHS to take us to court and go through these proceedings, they could have kept Archie on a ventilator, no questions asked, for 6 months.
Archie Battersby's mother. Well, in other news today, MPs are warning the greatest staffing crisis in NHS history is creating a serious risk now to patient safety. The Health and Social Care Committee says research shows the health service is short of 12,000 doctors and 50,000 nurses and midwives. It also warns the government has no decisive strategy to help. Former Health Secretary and Committee Chair Jeremy Hunt told GB News young doctors are choosing not to stay.
Well, what you're getting at the moment, Esther, is a vicious circle, because people are becoming a GP after 10 years of training. Maybe they're 28, 29 years old. They're finding that seeing 40 patients in one day in 10-minute slots is very stressful. And then they're saying, actually, I don't want to do this every day. I think I'll reduce it to 3 days or 4 days a week. But that, of course, puts more pressure on their colleagues.
Jeremy Hunt. An independent review has found Cricket Scotland to be institutionally racist. The report by consultancy firm Plan for Sport cites 448 examples and failings in 29 out of 31 indicators. Cricket Scotland's entire board resigned before the report's publication, saying it would allow new structures to be created to implement its recommendations. And as you've been hearing, the final two candidates to become Prime Minister will face their first televised head-to-head debate tonight. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss have been trading blows over immigration, China and tax cuts over the weekend. The Foreign Secretary and the former Chancellor are vowing to toughen immigration controls. Police are investigating after a death threat was made against Government Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt. A letter sent to the former Tory leadership candidate's constituency office reportedly threatened to shoot her. It was received before she was eliminated from the contest to become Prime Minister. Hampshire Police say measures have been put in place to protect Mrs Mordaunt and her family. And Sir Keir Starmer says the next Labour government will prioritise growth. During a speech in Liverpool, the Labour leader condemned the Tory government's record over the last decade, saying the UK economy is weaker than our competitors. He also criticised the two candidates vying to become Prime Minister, saying they don't understand the modern economy. In international news, Ukraine expects grain exports through the Black Sea to resume this week after months of Russian blockades. It follows a UN-brokered deal aimed at easing global food shortages. Government officials say the first shipment should leave from the port of Chornomorsk, with all other ports to begin exports within 2 weeks. And some of the UK's major cities are bidding to host Eurovision 2023. Sheffield, Manchester and London have all announced their intentions to apply after Britain was asked to replace Ukraine. Boris Johnson says the event will celebrate the Ukrainian people. Earlier this year, the UK was runner-up to Ukrainian entry Kalush Orchestra. That's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now let's get back to Brazier with Mark Longhurst.
Polly, thanks very much. Yes, you're with me. Mark Longhurst standing in for Colin this week. And this is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, a new report by MP says that patient safety is being put at serious risk because of the large number of unfilled NHS job vacancies. Now, the analysis by the Commons Health and Social Care Select Committee, that's an all-party committee, says the NHS in England is facing its worst staffing crisis in history. It's currently short of 12,000 hospital doctors and more than 50,000 nurses and midwives. Well, earlier, the former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, who's chairing the committee behind this report, told GB News why he believes the NHS is facing such difficult recruitment problems.
Fundamental problem that we lay bare in this report is our failure as a country to train enough doctors and nurses over very many years. And that is because government after government has said it doesn't matter if we don't quite train enough doctors because we can always import them from overseas. And the fact is that COVID was a global pandemic. Everyone's got their COVID backlog. There's a shortage of 2 million doctors and 15 million nurses worldwide. And it is just time we took a decision as a country that we have the biggest health system in the world with the NHS. We're going to train the numbers we actually need.
Well, that was Jeremy Hunt speaking to us a little earlier. Our next guest says he's been warning the government of this very crisis for years. Angus Dalgleish, Professor of Oncology at St George's Hospital Medical School. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Professor. I guess you won't be taking much pleasure in saying, "We told you so."
Well, no. I mean, it was very, very obvious we were going to run into this problem several years ago, and a good decade ago. And I noticed it when the majority of intake to our British medical schools, it went over the 50-50 line. There were more women being accepted than men. And instantly, it was very, very obvious that when that was the case, they would not work full time, and that if you wanted to keep pace, you had to double the number of doctors just to keep pace. And there was tremendous resistance in increasing the number of medical students we were training. I was horrified to see the number of excellent candidates that my own medical school were turning down because there were not enough places, or the country couldn't afford it. So the idea that when they were in the last elections, they were all guaranteeing an extra 6,000 GPs was just ludicrous to me. When I just saw all my peers, they were leaving in droves. They were all taking early retirement.
Yeah.
And I pointed out that you could argue that the main job of the Chancellor appeared to be trying to get rid of as many experienced doctors as possible with the problems with the pensions. And they were all leaving because they were being taxed so heavily.
Yes, that seems to have been quite a successful policy, doesn't it? I mean, this is the issue within the NHS. A lot of people saying it's not a recruitment problem as such, it's a retention problem. But given the sort of endemic stressful conditions, is that going to be something that the NHS will always face?
I think it will until it's completely restructured. I mean, I do believe that the end of the GP as we know it is here with us. I mean, it's not nigh; it is with us, and we're going to have a completely different way of how we treat the population that are of need. Yeah. I mean, first of all, the GP is a gatekeeper, and if you've got cancer or something which might be cancer, and it's really you're getting ill quite quickly, but it's not bad enough to go to A&E. I mean, I know people who said they had to wait 3 weeks for a telephone call before they could start the process of getting into the system. We need to adopt the walk-in centres where you can get a blood test and a scan for lumps and bumps and be triaged by a nurse, perhaps a special clinical nurse, and not have to wait for the ever-diminishing numbers of GPs. So we need to bypass them as gatekeepers. And I do think we then need to have these diagnostic centres and the general practices linked in to a central medical facility.
So what you're talking about then, is not necessarily things like the ambulances waiting outside hospital and A&E departments. It's this very first tier within the NHS where we see the GP, and that needs to be rethought structurally.
It has to be rethought because it's not working and it's getting worse and worse. And even one of my own colleagues, who's a consultant, his own GP could only give him an urgent telephone call in 3 weeks. Well, he had enough sense to realise that what he had was serious. Yeah. So, and this is a terribly important example. He knew, because he was a physician, he paid for his scan, he paid for his blood test. He turned out to have a condition that, if treated there and then, was curable. If you waited for 3 weeks, he could have been paralysed. I mean, this is the extent of the practice of delay. You're going to make things worse and worse, and the NHS is going to be more and more burdened. Whereas if it had a quick, responsive way of dealing with these problems, then a stitch in time saves 9. I mean, that's the message here, and we're not getting it with the current GP practices. We must have some other way of bypassing them for things to be diagnosed quickly. Now, they have these centres on the continent. They even have them in America, where they will say the healthcare is nothing but privatised. So why can't we have them in the NHS? Especially now, our GP system was marvellous when you could see one within 24 hours or 48 hours. That is no longer the case. So it has to be redressed.
Professor Dalgleish, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for bringing us your expert opinion from within the ranks, as you say, even the experts having to really push to get seen by a GP. But thank you very much indeed for your time. We'll speak to you again. But let's reflect now. Joining us in the studio for the next couple of hours here on Brazier is a former government minister. You weren't directly involved in health, Norman. You were transport in the Home Office.
Yes.
But clearly, I mean, health is one of the really big, difficult problems for a government to grapple with.
Well, indeed it is. And if you look at Jeremy Hunt's report, the committee's report today, it seems to be well-resourced and quite sensible in drawing attention to the problems, one of which is the failure to train enough doctors and nurses, One is, as you mentioned, the retention issue, because people clearly are leaving when we want to retain them. And why are they leaving? Partly they're leaving because they're under so much stress, because there aren't enough doctors and nurses. They're having to work too hard. They're not able professionally to give as much time to each patient as they want to give, and having to cut corners, and that's very stressful.
And very quickly, I mean, a lot of people saying it seems that GP practices run as businesses nowadays rather than as a health hub.
Well, they always were businesses, to be honest with you, because under the privatisation, the nationalisation system in 1947, I think it was under the Labour government, GPs were excluded from the NHS. They are private individuals who service the NHS, which is a different situation.
To the,
yes, indeed. Different from doctors and nurses in the hospitals.
Yeah.
So they have a different view. But I mean, you know, your oncologist was absolutely right about this. I mean, the GP system is not working properly. You used to be able to get an appointment within 24 hours. GPs used to come out to you if you wanted them to come out to you. Now there's not enough time. I mean, I went to try to get an appointment for something not very serious for myself. I couldn't get anyone on the phone because everybody has to ring at 9:30 in the morning, the same time.
And everyone's trying to ring at the same time.
I actually went into the surgery and said, can I have a non-urgent appointment? They said, no, there's no non-urgent appointments. They've all gone. I said, well, I don't mind one in 3 weeks' time. Oh, no, there's nothing for 3 weeks' time. I said, well, what do I do then? I'm standing here in your surgery. They said, what you do is ring up at 9:30 in the morning with everybody else and pretend it's urgent. Well, it's not. I mean, what kind of system is that?
Yeah. Kafkaesque, isn't it?
Yeah.
Norm, for the moment, thank you. But as we say, you're with us for the next 2 hours. Plenty to talk about, including, of course, the economy. Because during a speech in Liverpool this morning, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, set out his economic vision for the UK if, of course, his party wins the next general election. Now, the leader of the opposition claimed that net zero would still be at the heart of economic plans, but so too would be growth.
We must be clear about the kind of growth that we need. The growth I want for Britain is strong, secure and fair. Strong because it will build a foundation where every business and every person pays a role. Secure because it will produce good jobs that don't leave people feeling insecure. And fair because it will unlock the potential of every place, every community, every town and every city. So today I can announce we will establish an Industrial Strategy Council, and we will go further by putting it on a statutory footing. It will provide advice that shapes policy in the way the Climate Change Committee does, or the Office of Budget Responsibility, a permanent part of the landscape that sets out our strategic national priorities that go beyond the political cycle, brings in the expertise of business, science and unions, holds us to account for our decisions.
Well, joining us now in the studio, our economics and business editor and, of course, presenter of On the Money, Liam Halligan. Liam, are you excited?
Tingling with anticipation. I tell you what's going.
The Industrial Strategy Council.
I tell you what's going on here, Mark. We're all old of us on this panel long enough in the tooth to remember the prawn cocktail offensive. Do you remember that in the early and mid-90s when the Blairites were trying to reshape the Labour Party?
Just before Cool Britannia.
Indeed. Make it... Oasis was still the spiral carpets or something, whatever they were called. This is all about the Labour Party trying to convince Middle England, if you like, that it's responsible with the public finances. And Keir Starmer today, he was saying that he won't take on any day-to-day spending without saying it's been funded. That will annoy the Corbynistas, of course, but that's probably to his electoral advantage.
Growth, 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 but no real explanation how he's going to do that with a country facing stagflation.
This is the issue that everyone is grappling with. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak are going to slug it out on exactly that question tonight when they lock in their latest debate, the first of several debates we're going to see between the two Tory hopefuls for Prime Minister. And, of course, Labour are grappling with that too. But it strikes me as really, really interesting. We've now got the leader of the Labour Party trying to outflank on the question of fiscal responsibility. The person in the Tory party who is portraying herself as the Thatcherite candidate, Liz Truss. Politics really is being turned on its head. And, of course, herself a former Liberal Democrat and somebody who voted Remain.
Yeah, I won't push that on you. But one thought, I mean, he's talked yet again, Keir Starmer, about, poorly paid jobs without much security. I mean, will that be pricking the ears of the unions, thinking we may have a bit more of a friend here as we're facing all these problems this summer of discontent, as it seems?
Well, do you know, I don't wish to be unkind to Keir Starmer, but I listened to that and it was completely vacuous. There was nothing in there of any magnitude.
Not even the Industrial Strategy Council.
Well, what's that? It's a talking shop. I mean, nothing in there at all. What are the policies? It reminds me of, I don't know if any of your viewers remember this, Peter Sellers in the parliamentary speech he issued in 1958, when he actually said nothing but 3 minutes. And he said, they finished the track by saying, and finally, my friends, may I say this, and the record finished. And that was what that was. Yeah. He's got to do better than that. The irony was, if you look back to the last election, some of Labour's policies were actually quite popular. Yeah. For example, people object strongly to the fact that water companies are making vast profits and there's all sewage being chucked into the water. But it was Corbyn who wasn't popular, not the policy.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, I think he's also rode back from nationalising anything.
Absolutely.
No, he's saying he's going to nationalise the railways, but he's not going to nationalise any of the utilities.
They're nationalised anyway.
Well, they are to a degree. They are to a degree.
We'll find out on Wednesday, won't we?
We will indeed. Will we be able to get to work any of us?
Quite.
I'll be sleeping under that desk, Mark.
I wonder
Mercy Morogi will be kicking me in the head when I wake up. I wake up in the morning. It strikes me though that Labour have got some credible policies. They just didn't talk about them today. Rachel Reeves is Shadow Chancellor. She is a credible person. She's a former Bank of England economist. When they stand up to talk about economic policy, with all respect to the Leader of the Opposition, he should be using his front bench team, not least Rachel Reeves, because she has got credibility on this issue. She talked earlier about business rates, about getting down business rates for small and medium-sized enterprises. That's the kind of drum that Labour should be banging, rather than the more ideological stuff.
She's been muzzled. I mean, Keir Starmer's strategy is to say nothing before the next election and hope that the Tories lose it. That's not a sensible strategy, in my view.
Yeah, don't say anything. Well, we'll find out tonight from the two Conservative hopefuls, of course. But, gentlemen, for the moment, thank you, because, indeed, those two Tory party leadership hopefuls are battling it out to be, yes, the next Prime Minister, remember, setting out their policy ideas when it comes to policing the UK's borders. Now, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, has claimed she will expand the Rwanda plan and increase the number of Border Force staff. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, on the other hand, says he's got a 10-point plan to include the possibility of migrants being housed offshore, wait for it, in cruise ships. Well, the two contenders will face each other in a live debate this evening in Stoke-on-Trent. But let's get reaction here. First of all, Alp Mehmet joining us, the chair of Migration Watch, in the studio with us. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to you. Carry on cruising, cruise ships offshore. It sounds ludicrous, isn't it?
Well, it was actually tried once before, and it just so happened, I think, that it was Douglas Hurd, Home Secretary.
You're quite right.
And it was all tried, and lo and behold, it sank. During the big storm. So it's nothing new.
And they've had plans about prisoners as well in sort of ships offshore.
I mean, it's the practicalities of it all. To be honest, I think Rishi Sunak's 10-point plan is a 10-point plan to nowhere. Frankly, it's.
And is the problem all this is addressed to Tory party faithful, particularly perhaps the right wing of the party? It's not really addressing what needs to be done when they become Prime Minister and run the country?
Obviously, that's what the campaign is all about. That's what they're contending for. They want to be Prime Minister, and they've got to be elected leaders of the Conservative Party first. So, I mean, that's clearly where their arguments are directed towards. The thing is that I'm not sure that they're getting it right in terms of the bit of immigration that they should be discussing.
Which is?
Overall immigration.
Right.
Asylum is actually 1/5, 1/6 of overall legal immigration. And they're just scared. They're running scared of actually discussing that issue. We had 3.5 million people added to our population in just 10 years. And you know, over 80% of that was due to immigration.
Right.
Immigrants and children born to them. and they won't discuss it.
Yeah, and Rwanda has become a bit of a football, particularly between the two of them, for time. Where are we on this? I mean, a bit far to send the cruise ships around to Rwanda, isn't it?
Well, look, I mean, I totally agree with the point just made, actually, that this is about the Tory party leadership. And unfortunately, what's happening is that Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have both concluded that you have to go far to the right to win the membership, the electorate, which is 0.003% of the population, who are by and large well off, by and large in the South East, and by and large quite right-wing. So they're going to make promises to win this particular election, which are going to have to be delivered afterwards, whether they make any sense or not. So I don't think for a minute Rishi Sunak thinks Rwanda's a good idea, but he daren't say that.
They're stuck with it.
He daren't say that.
Yeah.
May I beg to differ?
Of course, that's why you're here.
This is not right-wing by any means.
Right.
There's a lot of Labour Party, in fact, over 56%.
Well, on Rwanda specifically, you mean?
On Rwanda, on the whole immigration issue,
Right.
but on Rwanda, all people, according to polling, the majority want Rwanda to work. It's not... But in a way, Rwanda it was never going to solve the whole issue of cross-channel immigration. And I've said this on this station over and over again.
Yeah.
It's part of it. What's happening at the moment, it's stalled. We won't really know whether it has any impact until the flights take off and this starts operating. Otherwise, we're actually waiting now to see.
The vacuum. Yeah.
And they've got to discuss it. The two candidates have got to discuss immigration.
Well, we shall see tonight, of course, the first televised debate between the two. Mehmet,
I won't hold my breath.
OK, we shall watch with interest. More from Norman as well a little later. But for the moment, thank you both. I'm Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week. Just to remind you, this is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, the National Grid had to issue an emergency appeal to Belgium, yes, Belgium, last week to keep our lights on in Britain. We'll be speaking to an energy expert about that. We'll be back in a moment. We'll keep the lights on for you.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. You're with Mark Longhurst, standing in this week for Colin, and this is GB News on TV, online and digital radio. And yes, the lights are still on. However, The National Grid says it's been forced to issue an emergency appeal to Belgium, no less, to help keep Britain's lights on. The Power Network's electricity system operator making an emergency call, we're told, to the operators of the Nemo undersea cable, which runs between Belgium and the UK, well, other places in the continent as well, obviously, to ensure supplies were sent to the UK last week. Yes, we had failed to secure enough energy supply on the open market, apparently. Well, this crisis casting doubt on the grid's ability perhaps to cope this coming winter, when those gas supplies are expected to come under far more severe pressure. It is feared, of course, that Vladimir Putin could turn off the gas supply taps from Russia to Europe altogether, Europe using that gas to make electricity. Well, joining us now in the studio, Tony Lodge, Energy and Infrastructure Research Fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies, no less. Thanks for joining us. I'm scratching my head, I guess, with many others, as to why we need all this energy in the summer when we think we're not actually using it that much.
Well, you've actually got an interesting situation now where air conditioning and other units are coming to the fore, which we didn't really have 10, 20 years ago. But what's really interesting about the Belgium situation is that we've closed a third of our own power stations in the last 10 years. Many was down to obeying EU diktat, how it brought to be used too much on directives from the European Union. We closed a lot of our oil and coal stations.
Yeah.
We're now starting to close some of our gas stations. And rather than replace them net, we are importing power from the continent through what are called interconnectors, these undersea cables.
This is Nemo?
Nemo is one of them.
OK.
The government is determined to build more. The problem with that is that as Europe closes its own power stations on the other side, resources are running scarce.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we're wondering what's going to happen in the winter. If we're asking for the continent's help in the summer, what's going to happen in the winter when we're told they are the ones reliant on Russian gas to produce their own electricity?
You're going to get very, very, very thin margins. You're going to see much more chance of rationing. You're going to see higher prices because for Britain to bid to get power from the continent, she'll have to pay higher prices. This comes on the back of the European Union states also closing their older power stations, so they will find thinner margins there too.
Right.
It's a perfect horror movie, this.
So what happened to, we heard about the solar panels, apparently too hot for solar panels this week. Offshore wind farms, Norman will know, off the coast of Sussex, they're all whirling away, apart from the summer when we don't have any wind, apparently. I mean, is the whole renewable thing out of the equation now?
Renewables are definitely part of the future, but we've closed too much of what used to be called baseload.
Yeah.
So the coal stations have gone, dirty and clunky as they were, but they worked. We have closed a lot of our nuclear capacity. The old AGRs and the Magnox stations have gone and are going.
And have got to be closed because of safety reasons.
They have indeed, and some of them were built as late as as old as the late 60s. We're now getting to a stage where very old coal-fired power stations like Ratcliffe-on-Trent up there in Nottinghamshire, built in the late 60s, are going to be paid to stay on. Now, that is actually the greatest, I would argue, reflection of a failed energy policy, which we've endured for 10 years.
Norman, I'll bowl this to you. Again, a failure, it seems, of long-term strategic planning of many successive governments, not just the current one.
It seems we're having that discussion this afternoon about the NHS.
It's a theme running through,
and everything else.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's right to close coal power stations. It's right to take offline old nuclear stations, but you have to plan to make sure you've got sufficient capacity. In parallel with that, that's not been done.
Yeah.
I'm a great fan of renewable energy, but I'm also a fan of having enough energy to make sure the country works. We haven't done enough, by the way, in this country on energy conservation, I don't think, and making sure that energy efficiency works.
And insulating homes, which obviously is a big thing.
Our homes are deeply energy inefficient in this country. But, the thing about Belgium this week, perhaps it needs to be corrected if I'm wrong here, but I saw in the papers that we were paying 50 times normal price for that power.
Right.
That's extraordinary.
Very quickly, Tony, I'm going to make you now Energy Secretary in this new government. What do we do?
We put a moratorium on all new interconnectors, and we radically change, because many are in build and in planning. One was vetoed recently, interestingly, but we have to double down on our own capacity, and we have to get some new gas-fired power stations built quickly and get rough storage back. That is an absolutely critical point. Or whoever is Energy Secretary soon will find that they're on the opposition benches quite quickly.
Right. Start looking after ourselves, maybe. Thank you for your expert opinion, and we'll, of course, see how we fare this coming autumn and winter. For the moment, thanks very much indeed. You're watching GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. You're with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin this week. Now, still to come, we'll be giving our take on why, yes, short-sighted government, it's the theme, it seems, could cloud the future of the UK. But also debating the big topic of the day. We're asking, should we be bringing Boris back? Yes, it's been reported the Prime Minister believes he will be back in number 10 within a year. But first, let's bring you up to date the latest news headlines with Polly.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. The headlines: appeal court judges say they'll put on hold the ending of 12-year-old Archie Battersby's life for 48 hours to allow his parents time to approach the European Court. That comes after judges previously ruled doctors can lawfully stop providing him with life support treatment. Archie hasn't regained consciousness since suffering an accident at home several months ago. His parents were appealing against an earlier High Court ruling which upheld doctors' conclusions that Archie was brain dead. Archie's mother, Holly Dance, says she'll keep fighting.
We will continue this fight, and this time I will make sure that Archie's progression in court is actually stated. As I say, I think we've been silenced for too long now. I've got video evidence of Archie trying to breathe Friday and Saturday. The hospital seem to cherry pick what they want to put over to the court.
In other news today, an independent review has found Cricket Scotland to be institutionally racist. The report by consultancy firm Plan for Sport cites 448 examples and failings in 29 out of 31 categories. Cricket Scotland's entire board resigned before the report's publication, saying it would now allow new structures to be created to implement its recommendations. The final two candidates to become Prime Minister and Tory party leader will face their first televised head-to-head debate tonight. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss have both been trading blows over political hot potatoes like immigration, China and tax cuts over the weekend. The Foreign Secretary and the former Chancellor are both vowing to toughen controls on immigration. Ukraine expects grain exports through the Black Sea to resume this week after months of Russian blockades. It follows a UN-brokered deal aimed at easing global food shortages. Government officials say the first shipment should leave from the port of Chornomorsk, with all other ports beginning exports within 2 weeks. And some of the UK's major cities are bidding to host Eurovision 2023. Sheffield, Manchester and London have all announced their intentions to apply after Britain was asked to replace Ukraine. Boris Johnson says the event will celebrate the Ukrainian people. Earlier this year, the UK was runner-up to the Ukrainian entry. It was won, of course, by Kalush Orchestra. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. Mark Longhurst will be back with the Brazier programme in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory. twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, welcome back to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, this week sitting in for Colin. Now, plenty of you have been getting in touch. Your thoughts, it seems, mainly on the workforce crisis in the NHS. When doctors and nurses start their training, they should be made to sign a contract stating that they have to work for the NHS for at least 10 years. They're leaving the NHS to go into the private sector or going abroad to work. This is leaving the NHS facing a shortage of staff. Another problem is the NHS has too many management staff who are wasting millions of pounds. That's one view that's just come in. James saying, meanwhile, my grandson's girlfriend in Australia has 11 years of nursing experience, applied for a job in the NHS. She was refused. She came to the UK anyway and paid £1,500 for her qualifications to be UK registered. And she's again been turned down by the NHS for employment. Well, that seems extraordinary, doesn't it? Stephen, meanwhile, says, it's funny how there's a magic money tree to fund a war and supply arms and weapons to Ukraine, yet the NHS struggles. Priorities in this country have been backwards for too long now. Well, keep those views coming. We'll reflect them, of course, in the rest of the afternoon. But how about my view, just for a moment? The first televised debate taking place tonight between the two Tory party hopefuls, likely to be full of promises for the future, of course, and maybe just a bit of airbrushing about the past, all designed to keep some 160,000 members of the Tory party membership on side and to garner their votes to become party leader. But, of course, whoever wins is going to be Prime Minister, remember, the country's leader. And they will have to address an overflowing in-tray on that first day in number 10, September the 6th. Now, the temptation may be for quick fixes to get as many things sorted as quickly as possible before a general election. And that could be with us within 18 months or perhaps even sooner if things go horribly wrong with the economy and our energy supplies, as we've just been discussing, this autumn and winter. But how many of our current problems stem from the effects of that political virus, short-termism? Successive governments trying to sort out politically inopportune problems before it bites them at the ballot box. Sir Keir Starmer today gave us his ideas to fix the economy. Don't cling to old ideas, but go for growth, growth, growth. There was little detail, it seems, as to how to achieve that, apart from everyone pulling together as a partnership. Both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss have been grappling with how to keep the coffers filled as the economy tanks, with many economists observing it's been an accident waiting to happen for a long time. Both tax and spending policies being used over the past decade to keep voters happy rather than putting the public finances on a sound footing. Well, now, added to that number 10 in-tray, the warning of a serious risk to staff and patient safety because of the persistent and chronic NHS understaffing. It's an all-party committee of MPs that has observed that the government had no credible strategy to make the situation better. Indeed, successive health secretaries have had to apply emergency sticking plasters or first aid to keep the health service functioning, with little thought, it seems, to long-term strategic planning. Well, it's all come back to bite them, says today's report from the MPs. Now, amid all this, tempers and temperatures rising elsewhere. Those hard-working families that politicians keep telling us about have been trying to escape for a well-earned holiday, only to sit in their cars at Dover and Folkestone for more than 20 hours in many cases. All the fault of those pesky post-Brexit passport stamps, say many, or the French border staff being a little laissez-faire about their work rotas. Not so, say many local councillors and MPs in Kent. Another failure, they say, of long-term strategic planning. Just one major road leading into Dover, The M20 then gets jammed with lorries because of Operation Stack. The alternative A2 main road never upgraded to a dual carriageway. And those holidaymakers, not the only ones, gazing longingly over the channel as we've just been discussing. The National Grid reported to issue that emergency request to Belgium. Send us more power over the Nemo undersea cable. Just too hot, apparently, for many of our British solar panels. No wind power offshore. And for some strange reason, everyone wanting to switch on the air conditioning at the same time when it hit over 40 Celsius. A creaking system suffering from years of inadequate planning and investment, say the energy experts. We've just had one here in the studio. So just wait for the winter ahead if those Russians decide to switch off the gas taps. What price a bit of long-termism for the next Prime Minister as they get stuck into that in-tray on September the 6th and look ahead on a strategic level? See it, say it, sorted. Maybe. Norman's still with us, of course, who is a veteran of previous government administrations. True to say that all have to, firefight, if you like, with these short-term problems and can't really think ahead that much.
You're completely right to identify short-termism as a major fault in this country's system. Perhaps it's in other countries, I don't know, but it certainly is. Here it goes on now. Let me give you two examples. The debt repayments last month, Britain's debt repayments were 19.4 billion last month. This is coming out of Treasury coffers. The deficit's going to be over 100 million this year. And yet we got Liz Truss, not Rishi Sunak yet, but he may do, promising tax cuts, which has to be funded from the Treasury. And why? Because people apparently want irresponsible jam today rather than responsible jam at some point in the future.
And the difficulty is, because obviously they're not just selling it to the party membership, they're selling it to the country now to be a Prime Minister. That's not going to win you votes saying, I'm going to inflict more pain on you for longer.
This is why it's difficult with, from my own perspective in government, transport planning, because most transport interventions, you mentioned the road to Dover, most transport interventions cause a lot of problems to start with.
Planning
people,
permission, for instance.
Digging around, annoying local people, costing money, and when the election comes around, nothing to show for it because it takes 10 years to get whatever it is in place. That's the problem with HS2, amongst other things. This is what the problem is. You've got a problem coming in with road pricing. Everybody knows we have to move towards pay-as-you-drive because diesel and petrol cars are going to disappear. The Treasury gets 40 billion about a year from fuel duty. That's going to go down the pan. And all the economists in the world will tell you we have to have pay-as-you-drive as a different system. All the politicians know that, but they won't commit to it. They put it in the too difficult pile for someone else to deal with later on.
OK, well, we can blame the politicians maybe, but also perhaps other planners as well. But Norman, for the moment, thank you for that view. Keep your views coming in on that particular problem as well, the short-termism and planning for the future. But time for the debate coming up this hour, with more than 10,000 Conservative Party members now signing a petition calling for Boris Johnson's name, yes, Boris, to be added to the final round of this current leadership election. Also being reported last week, he believes he could be back in number 10 as Prime Minister within 12 months. That really is short-termism. But two cabinet ministers have poured water on that suggestion that he could be soon back. Work and Pension Secretary Therese Coffey describing the idea as speculation and tittle-tattle. So today we're asking, could we bring Boris back? Joined by a former government minister, Norman Baker, who's just been telling us about the problems of planning long-term, and research fellow at the Bow Group, Benjamin Loughnane. Thank you for joining us, Benjamin. We're just talking about short-termism, but I mean, this really would be short-term, bringing a Prime Minister back when he's not even gone out the door.
Yeah, well, look, I said 6 months ago, when I was actually on Colin's show, I was asked, should Boris go? So, but morally, yes, but who's going to replace him? The options are so dire that it's going to be very difficult, and people are going to start quite liking Boris when they see what the other options are.
Right.
Now, part of this is Boris's fault, because he created a cabinet of people who were not a threat to him. He deliberately surrounded himself by people who wouldn't upstage him, people who weren't a threat to him.
And this presidential style that we've heard about.
And this presidential style, he wanted to be this big sort of Jupiter figure, which sort of had all the attention on him and on no one else. The problem is that led to bad governance, it led to bad policy, it led to a lot of scandals and a lot of issues within his government, which eventually brought him down. So his idea to not create threats around him actually was the threat.
Can I just put this to you? Many of the ministers and MPs decided they couldn't cope with him any longer because they thought he would lose them the next general election. What's changed amongst these, 10,000, how many, who think it's a good idea to get him back before what will be a general election, perhaps in 18 months or even shorter?
Yeah, I think it's seeing the other options, the circus of the recent leadership contest, the people who stood up. There were a couple of candidates who got the grassroots attention, people like Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman, Penny Mordaunt to some degree, but she sort of crashed and burned after a couple of days. But I think seeing that process play out, people have gone, actually, Boris wasn't all that bad when you look at who's going to replace him.
Norman, I'm just wondering what the other candidates who've been bumped off would make of it in terms of just basic democracy, that Boris comes back in as a sort of shoo-in.
Well, Boris doesn't always adhere to the rules of democracy. Part of the problems that have occurred. But, there is a process. It's not my process, it's the Tory party process, that you can't stand again if you resign. John Major resigned in 1985, I think it was, and you stood again to be Tory party leader and was re-elected. I think he was... I don't know if he was challenged at that point or wasn't challenged, but anyway, he got re-elected. Yeah. So Boris could have put himself forward. He could have done that if he wanted to do that, as a vote of confidence. Could he not do that?
No, the party constitution changed last year.
Oh, right.
And it changed...
that was handy.
Two key things changed, which really messed up this contest. The first is that the Prime Minister can't stand if he's outgoing. And the other thing was that Lords can't run. So someone like Lord Frost, who would have had a lot of popular support because he resigned early on, he didn't resign when it was opportune, when he had a chance to run for leader like Rishi Sunak.
Well, let's stay with the technical aspect, because the other thing I've got to flag up is we've got the Privileges Committee and a hearing that basically could mean that he's broken parliamentary law by allegedly not being perhaps 100% accurate with the truth on Partygate, we put it that way. Yeah. That would mean he's out the door.
Well, yeah, perhaps, and this is the thing, whether he comes back or not, whether he's popular or not, he has got quite a few skeletons in his closet. But if he were, the real question is, if he were on the ballot next to Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, would he win the membership vote? I think he actually would. I think he'd have a very good shot, in spite of Partygate, in spite of everything else. I think that he still would remain more popular than Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss.
But then be defeated at a general election?
Perhaps, but then Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss might too. So in terms of the party, it doesn't really make a difference.
You were nodding your head there.
Well, far be it from me to help the Conservative Party, but the fact is that I think that a relaunch of the new leader gives the Tory party a better chance of winning the election than going to election with Boris Johnson, who's got so much baggage.
Yeah, and an indication perhaps that some, as you said, Tory party members are thinking, we've got thin pickings here.
Yeah, well, I know that not only that, but in places like the Red Wall, for example, Boris still remained quite popular because all of this stuff, this Westminster bubble stories, it trickles outwards to some extent, and people do start to dislike Boris. But in the Red Wall, he was still known as the guy who delivered Brexit.
And that's the real fear,
and that's
that none of the candidates really are
well, they're not
getting any traction up there.
And Rishi Sunak's not very popular in the Red Wall because of his economic policy. And Liz Truss, frankly, she was a Remainer. She was a Lib Dem. She wanted to abolish the monarchy. That's not going to play well in the Red Wall.
Well, there we are. We shall see. But if there's another name to be added, he's going to have to get a bit of move on, isn't he? And maybe barge into the TV studio tonight to add to that debate.
I think it's hubris on his part, to be honest with you, and it's unconstitutional.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed for the moment. We shall see what emerges in tonight's debate, of course, on the latest. Norman with us for the rest of the 2 hours. But, Benjamin, thank you for your time. Now, let's just remind you that we've got me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week on GB News, on TV, online and on radio. Coming up at 5, MPs warning the NHS in England facing its worst staffing crisis in history. We'll be joined by a nurse who left the health service back in December, giving us first-hand experience of why she believes the profession isn't attracting the right sort of people, and the rundown of 5 stories you may want to know about this afternoon before 5 in our 5 at 5. So let's just update you on that. The parents of a 12-year-old boy today losing their appeal against a decision to allow life support treatment to end. Archie Battersby found unconscious at his home in Essex in April. Doctors at the Royal London Hospital believing he is brain dead. The appeal judges supported a High Court ruling that ending his life was lawful and in his best interests. At 4, firefighters calling on people to stop using to prevent fires in the hot weather. The fire service declaring a major incident yesterday after a number of outbreaks across London and Surrey. And last Tuesday, remember, the fire service recording its busiest day since World War II, all a result of those extreme temperatures. At 3, a new report suggesting almost half of British women do no regular exercise, 1 in 3 claiming their physical health has deteriorated over the past 12 months. It compares to just a quarter of men saying their health has worsened since the start of the pandemic, all according to a study by Nuffield Health. At 2, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, yes, they're back, reportedly had 2 intruder alerts at their mansion in the US, Santa Monica, since the start of May. The pair moving to California in 2020 after stepping down as senior royals. Now, this report comes after Harry has won his bid to bring a High Court claim against the Home Office over security arrangements while in the UK. And at 1, plans revealed for a 75-mile-long skyscraper clad in mirrors, all to be built in the Saudi desert. Leaked architectural designs claim that Mirror Line, an entire city of 5 million people, will be built on stilts as high as the Empire State Building. Is this April the 1st? No. And will have its own high-speed railway, a sports stadium, vertical gardens, where vegetables will be harvested by robots. Well, there we are. Those are the 5 things you might want to know or not before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Let's take a look in more detail at the stories we just unveiled with Norman. I won't bowl the skyscraper at you. Well, but, I mean, we talk about long-term planning. That is a project, isn't it?
It's crazy, isn't it? It's absolutely crazy. I mean, I wonder what the carbon footprint of that particular proposal is. 75 miles long. I mean, it does something like April the 1st, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a touchy subject with the Saudis, of course, isn't it? We're looking at their sort of human rights record, and yes. Yet, you know, Biden's indicated we still need their oil, we still need that pumped into the international economy.
As a consequence of the short-termism of energy policy, as a matter of fact. But, I mean, look, I mean, this is a crazy scheme, and if only that money was spent on something to help the world, rather than the 75-mile long bit of glass.
Where would you spend it?
I'd spend it on helping those who are poorest. I mean, the guys in charge of Saudi Arabia have got so much money, it's untrue. If they allocated 1% of their wealth to the United Nations, it would make a huge difference to African countries. Yeah.
OK, well, thank you for the moment. Norman with us all afternoon to actually put your slide rule across the short or long-term problems we've got. You're with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin this week on GB News, on TV, online and digital. Lots more to come in this next hour.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Showers today will ease overnight with clear spells. It will be a cool night and then a better chance of sunny spells and many places staying dry on Tuesday. Low pressure has been drifting into Scandinavia through the day, but around that low, a weather front has brought some lively downpours to eastern Scotland into northern England as well, and those showers or even longer spells of rain will push south overnight, eventually easing, but still further showers to come for northwest England into North Wales, the Midlands and East Anglia by the end of the night. A lot of cloud in this zone as well. Showers also continue to arrive into the northwest of Scotland, the north coast of Northern Ireland. In between, some clear spells and temperatures in some sheltered spots dipping to 5 to 8 Celsius. So a fresh start to Tuesday, but for many it's a dry and bright start, a legacy of cloud across northern, central and southern England. That may take some time to break up, but it will break up, and then by the afternoon, increasingly sunny spells developing in many places. Still a few showers around, especially central areas and the north of Scotland, but away from the showers, feeling pleasant in the sunshine. High teens, low 20s in the north, 22 to 25 Celsius in the south. Tuesday evening then sees plenty of dry and bright weather until the sun goes down, and really it's a clear night for many. The clearest night of the week, I think, and with lighter winds it will be an even cooler night with temperatures away from towns and cities in the single figures. In towns and cities more likely to be 11 to 13 Celsius fairly widely. And then a bright start to Wednesday. Wednesday looks like the sunniest day of the week. There'll still be a few showers developing, particularly across southern and eventually central parts of the country. And northern Scotland will continue to see showers. But Thursday, also a showery day. Mostly the showers will be in the north and turning warmer on Friday.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome back to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin this week. And coming up live at 5, that new report by MPs warning that the NHS in England is facing the worst staffing crisis in its history. Now, the report by the Commons Health and Social Care Committee says unfilled vacancies are posing a serious risk to patient safety. In a few moments, the first-hand experience of one former NHS nurse who left the service in December last year. As Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak prepare to battle it out in a TV debate this evening, inching their way towards becoming the next Tory leader and, of course, our Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, has set out his economic priorities if Labour win the next general election.
There is no task more central to my ambitions for Britain than making the country and its people better off.
We'll be getting the thoughts of financial and business journalist Jasmine Birtles on what Sir Keir had to say. And the parents of 12-year-old Archie Battersby have lost their legal appeal to continue to keep him on life support. We'll have the latest with our reporter, Alice Porter. And joining us for the next hour, former Transport Minister Norman Baker with his views on all the issues of the day. But first, let's get the latest news headlines with Polly.
Mark, thank you. The latest headlines. Appeal court judges say they'll put on hold the ending of Archie Battersby's treatment for 48 hours to allow his parents time to approach the European Court. They had ruled that doctors could lawfully stop providing Archie with life support treatment. The 12-year-old, who's being treated at the Royal London Hospital, hasn't regained consciousness after suffering an accident at home 3 months ago. His parents were appealing an earlier High Court ruling which upheld doctors' conclusions that he was brain dead. Archie's mother, Holly, told GB News she's still going to fight.
We realise that we are coming to an end now, but like I said from day one, I will fight to get my little boy time. I just think it's a shame that the whole family and close friends have had to go through all of this traumatic experience, to do it. If it comes down to funding, the amount of that it's taken or cost the NHS to take us to court and go through these proceedings, they could have kept Archie on a ventilator, no questions asked, for 6 months.
In other news today, MPs are warning the greatest staffing crisis in NHS history is creating a serious risk to patient safety. The Health and Social Care Committee says research shows the health service is short of 12,000 doctors and 50,000 nurses and midwives. It also warns the government has no decisive strategy to help. Former Health Secretary and Committee Chair Jeremy Hunt told GB News young doctors are choosing not to stay.
Well, what you're getting at the moment, Esther, is a vicious circle, because people are becoming a GP after 10 years of training. Maybe they're 28, 29 years old. They're finding that seeing 40 patients in one day in 10-minute slots is very stressful. And then they're saying, actually, I don't want to do this every day. I think I'll reduce it to 3 days or 4 days a week. But that, of course, puts more pressure on their colleagues.
An independent review has found Cricket Scotland to be institutionally racist. The report by consultancy firm Plan for Sport cites 448 examples and failings in 29 out of 31 indicators. Cricket Scotland's entire board has resigned before the report was published, saying it would allow new structures to be created to implement the recommendations. The final two candidates to become Prime Minister and Tory party leader will face their first televised head-to-head debate tonight. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss have been trading blows over immigration, China and tax cuts over the weekend. The Foreign Secretary and the former Chancellor are vowing to toughen controls on migration. And police are investigating after a death threat was made against the the government trade minister, Penny Mordaunt. A letter sent to her constituency office reportedly threatened to kill her. It was received before she was eliminated from the contest to become Prime Minister. Hampshire police say measures have been put in place to protect Mrs Mordaunt and her family. Sir Keir Starmer says the next Labour government will prioritise growth, growth, growth. During a speech in Liverpool, the Labour leader condemned the Tory government's record after the last decade, saying the UK economy is weaker than our competitors. He also criticised the two candidates vying to become Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, saying they don't understand the modern economy. International news, and Ukraine expects grain exports through the Black Sea to resume this week after months of Russian blockades. It follows a UN-brokered deal aimed at easing global food shortages. Government officials say the first shipment should leave the port of Chornomorsk, with all other ports to begin exports within 2 weeks. And some of the UK's major cities are bidding to host Eurovision 2023. Sheffield, Manchester and London have all announced their intentions to apply after Britain was asked to replace Ukraine. Boris Johnson says the event will be celebrating the Ukrainian people. Earlier this year, the UK was runner-up to the Ukrainian entry, Kalush Orchestra. That's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Brazier with Mark Longhurst.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. Yes, it's me, Mark Longhurst, standing in for Colin all this week. And you're watching and listening to GB News on TV, online and, of course, digital radio. Now, let's update you on this report by MPs suggesting the NHS in England is facing its worst staffing crisis in history. Well, this analysis by the Commons Health and Social Care Committee says patient safety is being put at serious risk because of the large number of unfilled NHS job vacancies. It's actually short of 12,000 hospital doctors and more than 50,000 nurses and midwives. Earlier, former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt, who chairs that committee behind the report, told GB News why he believes the NHS is facing such difficult recruitment problems.
Fundamental problem that we lay bare in this report is our failure as a country to train enough doctors and nurses over very many years. And that is because government after government has said, it doesn't matter if we don't quite train enough doctors because we can always import them from overseas. And the fact is that COVID was a global pandemic. Everyone's got their COVID backlog. There's a shortage of 2 million doctors and 15 million nurses worldwide. And it is just time we took a decision as a country that we have the biggest health system in the world with the NHS. We're going to train the numbers we actually need.
And just to tell you, not just the service in England looking as though it's in crisis, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland all facing similar staffing pressures, we're being told. Well, nurse and writer Sarah Jane Palmer is joining us now in the studio, along with Norman, who's still with us. Sarah, thanks for joining us. You left back in December last year.
Yeah.
Why was that? Why did you take that decision?
So I could have started a new contract in January, but I decided really the working conditions are quite poor. In the NHS, there's a lot of bureaucracy, and really, it was just quite difficult in terms of the psychological burden as well that you get from working in that type of job.
The stress.
Yeah, there's a lot of stress. There's everyone's overworked. I mean, the NHS staff survey last year showed that there was a 40% rate of burnout among nurses and midwives. And I think that sets the general picture, really, of just how bad it is. So you're working with a team that feel under stress, but also just unhappy, generally unhappy in their roles. And then that creates an atmosphere that can be quite tense.
Was this because of COVID particularly, that this put extra strain and stresses on the system and the individuals?
I think so. But I think also that all along there's always been a lot of pressure in terms of staffing. That's always been a problem. So this is nothing new. It's something that was always there, and it's just got even worse now because
You just sort of juggling just to keep the thing going.
Yeah, exactly. And then the pandemic happened, and the NHS, of course, was underprepared, under-resourced, and it meant that a lot of people went on long-term sick, left their careers entirely. 3,000 extra nurses last year alone left the nursing register.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem a problem of retention rather than recruitment. You know, people are there and they leave, having been trained and so on. What would it take for you to go back?
I think the working conditions need to be sorted out. The morale is so low. I think I'd find it particularly challenging to go into an environment where, like I've experienced before, even before the pandemic, you can go onto a ward and it's just you and one other nurse managing a ward of 30 patients where the doctors aren't always around. They're between different wards.
And it could be life and death.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially in cardiology, where I was working at one point. It can be so challenging that even if you're offered a good pay salary... It's
right, well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, you know, if there's a new government and it decides to start paying whatever percentage increase, I mean, is that going to be enough to solve this problem?
It's an incentive, certainly, but the thing is, it's the wider management structure of the NHS. I think they need a root and branch analysis that really finds the underpinning issues that they need to address.
And Norman, it seems we're coming back to the central question about long-term strategic infrastructure planning. I mean, you know, we've got these scenes of ambulances queuing outside hospitals. It seems incredible, given we're a modern, sophisticated nation. What does it take for a new government to really make that step change? I think we're going to start thinking about this differently.
Well, how long have you got? I mean, there's so much needs to be done. Part of the problem is the other end of the tunnel, if you like, which is the discharging of patients from hospitals into social care, and
because the beds just aren't there.
The grotesque underfunding of local councils, which means they don't want to take people. They're blocking hospital beds. I don't like that phrase particularly, but that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And that means people can't be admitted into the hospitals because there aren't beds, so they're sitting in ambulances outside. GPs are not able to see people apparently as often as they should do, which means people are going to A&E and putting undue pressure on A&E when they should be seeing their GP. The system is creaking at every single, at every element.
What happened, Sarah Jane, when you sort of alerted your superiors to the various problems? I mean, were they dealing with their own problems and so on?
Well, I would say they were very much dealing with their own problems, and that was evident through their behaviour. And actually, there was really a culture of bullying where I was working, and in multiple places that I've worked within the NHS, unfortunately.
What, from management or from other people that you were working with?
It was more from management, actually, yeah. And so it was I did submit a formal grievance. I don't know how much I'm supposed to go into.
No,
about
well,
that.
let's not get into details, but clearly we have been told this is an issue within the NHS.
Absolutely. It's a fundamental issue that's causing people to leave. It's not just the financial problems and this 5% increase that causes a real terms cut. It's also the culture of bullying, the institutionalised behaviours that you come across when you're working for such a large organisation that's so badly run, you know.
And maybe they're sort of panicking themselves and looking over their shoulder and
absolutely, yeah,
putting the pressure on you. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's hope that maybe at some stage you may be able to get back to helping people once more. But thanks for your time here on GB News.
Thank you very much.
Let's just tell you that a spokesman for the Department of Health and Social Care has said this to us. The number of people employed in healthcare is now growing, and NHS England had been asked to develop a long-term plan to recruit and retain more staff, retain more staff. As we continue to deliver on our commitment to recruit 50,000 more nurses by 2024, we are also running a £95 million recruitment drive for maternity services and providing £500 million to develop our valued social care workforce. Don't forget to keep your views coming in on that particular issue. Of course, many people finding difficulties getting to see doctors. Now, in a few moments, turning to the battle for number 10 ahead of tonight's TV debate between the two Tory leadership hopefuls, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, maybe Boris Johnson, who knows. But first, we turn to the leader of the opposition. During a speech in Liverpool this morning, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer set out his economic vision for the UK, if, of course, his party wins the next general election. Now, the leader of the opposition claimed that net zero would still be at the heart of economic plans, but so too would be growth, growth, growth.
We must be clear about the kind of growth that we need. The growth I want for Britain is strong, secure and fair. Strong because it will build a foundation where every business and every person plays a role. Secure, because it will produce good jobs that don't leave people feeling insecure. And fair, because it will unlock the potential of every place, every community, every town and every city. So today I can announce we will establish an Industrial Strategy Council, and we will go further by putting it on a statutory footing. It will provide advice that shapes policy in the way the Climate Change Committee does, or the Office of Budget Responsibility, a permanent part of the landscape that sets out our strategic national priorities that go beyond the political cycle, brings in the expertise of business, science and unions, holds us to account for our decisions.
Sir Keir talking a little earlier in Liverpool. Well, joining us now with her reaction, financial and business journalist Jasmine Birtles, also founder of moneymagpie.com and, of course, a guest very often on The Money. Thanks for joining us, Jasmine. Do you fancy being part of this Industrial Strategy Council, then?
Oh, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? It would be quite difficult, though, because Sir Keir's asking for growth, 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 but at the same time, I think holding back growth by insisting on net zero. I really don't think that we as a nation, or any nation, frankly, can have proper growth at this stage while still aiming for net zero in 2030. I simply don't think it can be done. And I think any of the leaders now that really want to pull us out of the morass that we and many other Western countries are in have to put way back these plans for net zero by, I would say, another 20 years, frankly.
I mean, the other issue being he touched on the productivity gap, with many equivalent cities in Europe. And is that part of the problem that, you know, if we have yet more red tape and bureaucracy on these issues, it's going to be difficult for business to really flourish?
Yes, certainly. Absolutely. Red tape is very much something that stops business. Bureaucracy, horrendous. I mean, part of the idea, apparently, of Brexit was to be able to cut much of this. And I think a lot of people, and particularly Brexiteers, have said, we in theory came out a few years ago, and yet nothing much has been done about bureaucracy and red tape. So we are pretty late, I think, to the party when it comes to cutting these. I'd like to see this happen now, ideally. But I'm also interested in what he said about growth from a Labour Party point of view, because really what he's saying, in a sense, is kind of what Liz Truss is saying. And generally, the way to get this sort of growth, certainly from a Tory party point of view, is to cut taxes. So I'd be interested to know if Keir is actually planning on cutting taxes, because that would be very much not a Labour plan. But then we've seen a Tory party doing exactly the opposite to what a Tory party would normally do in the last few years, essentially creating a magic money tree where they've been giving money around like it's sweets.
So, to be fair, Sir Keir did say he wasn't going to go down that route. But one other issue that he did touch on, saying that jobs are low-paid, insecure. I mean, does that indicate that Labour may start trying to, or buy off perhaps public services and the rail unions, whatever, with better pay deals?
Well, yeah, that would make sense, frankly. And it would perhaps help to keep his core followers behind him, while he has also said that he's not going to go down the nationalisation route, which has been quite a shock, I think, to the unions, because they were expecting him to say rails would be nationalised. You can see why they want energy to be renationalised. But I think he's right, Rachel Reeves is right, that we don't have the money at the moment to buy back the privatised industries, whether you think that they should be nationalised or not. Really, if the energy companies were to be nationalised, that should have happened 5-10 years ago when we thought we had the money, but we don't now.
Yeah. Jasmine, as ever, thank you for your expert opinion. Who'd want to be Prime Minister, eh? For the moment, thanks very much indeed. Well, indeed, the final two candidates who want to become Prime Minister are facing their first televised head-to-head tonight, and that will be on the BBC. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss being trading blows over immigration, China, tax cuts all over the weekend. The Foreign Secretary and the former Chancellor vowing to toughen controls on migration. Our political correspondent Tom Harwood joining us from Westminster. Tom, so far I think it's red meat they call it, clearly wanting to keep the party faithful on side. But they're going to have to reflect tonight too that they're going to have to sell themselves to the electorate as a new Prime Minister.
Yes, certainly two competing strategies here tonight, as we've seen really make itself consistently clear in the polls recently. Liz Truss is far ahead when it comes to the Conservative Party membership, but things are a lot closer in terms of who's seen to be more favourable with the country at large. And looking at the performance in those wider debates, those ones that weren't head-to-head but with more candidates, Rishi Sunak was seen by the general public in the snap polling that followed both of those debates to have done relatively well. His campaign is now looking towards a strategy of pointing to what the country thinks and telling Conservative Party members that he is best placed to win an election. Now, that looked like it was the case a week and a half ago with those last debates, but since then the polling has become a bit tighter when it comes to the country at large. There have been a couple of polls now that actually put Liz Truss ahead of Rishi Sunak when faced with a head-to-head against Keir Starmer. And so it's really interesting to see whether this will continue. Another interesting point of differentiation between the last two debates and this one is that now Liz Truss is considered widely in the media to be the front runner, whereas last time it looked like Rishi Sunak was the front runner. That means that the strategy of sort of trying to keep your head above the fray and not getting down and dirty and sort of trying to sit out a lot of the arguments will no longer work for Rishi Sunak. That front runner strategy of remaining relatively quiet has to change, and we've seen that changing for Rishi Sunak over the weekend. As you were mentioning there, those policy announcements that we saw come on Saturday and on Sunday on migration and on China. This may well be a more policy-focused debate than we have seen previously, both because Rishi Sunak needs to get onto policy from his challenger perspective now, but also because of that criticism of the blue-on-blue fighting that we saw, particularly in the ITV debate last Sunday. That really changed the narrative, and a lot of Tories didn't quite like how brutal it got.
Tom, for the moment, thank you for that. But let's bring in a former government minister, Norman Baker, to bring his thoughts on that. Do you expect it to get perhaps a little feisty tonight then on that score?
I think it will have to, because there's been so many dividing lines set. I mean, the economic policy the two have set out is quite juxtaposed to each other. We've had debates about China, not directly from the candidates, but from their supporters, of course, so they can deny them, but saying that Rishi Sunak was going to cave into China. This doesn't help the Tory party, and actually the opposition parties, Labour and Lib Dem, are just sort of watching this with glee, because all these quotes are going to be thrown back at the Conservatives between now and the next election.
And as we've seen, the electorate hates divided parties.
They do. I mean, I know that from the Liberal SDP days. The Labour Party, when it was divided, was out of power for quite a long time. And I think the Conservatives are somewhere, as they were in 1995, ahead of the 97 election, looking as if they're not going to win.
When they were wiped out.
When they were nearly wiped out, and that's where we are now.
One thought there, as we were just hearing from Jasmine, I mean, no matter who, whether it's Sir Keir Starmer with Labour or it's Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss, the room for manoeuvre with the economy is very, very limited.
Well, you've got Rishi Sunak saying we can't afford to do very much, and people don't like that, actually, but it's probably true, because the economics of the public finances are in a shocking state, partly because of COVID, partly, I have to say, because of Brexit as well. You've got Liz Truss, who's promising £30 billion of tax cuts, extra defence spending, more money on immigration officials, and you know, where's all this coming from? I mean, Margaret Thatcher would be horrified by this.
Yeah. And cruise ships maybe for all those migrants as well, who knows? Norman, for the moment, thank you for that. You're with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week, and you're on GB News, TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, the parents of a 12-year-old boy on life support have lost their legal appeal today to continue his treatment. We'll have the latest reaction with our reporter Alice Porter at the appeal court in London. First, though, let's take a look at the latest weather.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello again, you're watching Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, in for Colin all this week on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, lots of you, as ever, getting in touch with your thoughts, particularly on what MPs have today called the biggest workforce crisis in the history of the NHS. Jackie, first of all, says, why doesn't the government drop university fees for doctors and nurses in exchange for a guaranteed 10 to 15 years employment with the NHS? Interesting idea. While Trevor says, unfortunately, we are going to have to pay to see a private GP. Those who can afford it will have to pay for their own blood tests and initial diagnostics to get their results quickly. There's quite simply no other way forward right now, given the mess the NHS is in. John's been in touch to say, as with so many issues in the UK, you should look to Singapore for solutions, he observes. There are private GPs, but you can access a wide range of primary care options at short notice. The healthcare is not free, he says, as the NHS is, but it is subsidised by the taxpayer, so you must always pay something. Keep the views coming in, of course, and we'll reflect them here on GB News. Now, to the other news of the day, with the parents of 12-year-old Archie Battersby losing their appeal to continue his treatment. Archie, who's being cared for at the Royal London Hospital, has not regained consciousness since suffering an accident at home some 3 months ago. His parents had been appealing to the High Court ruling, which had upheld doctors' conclusions that he was brain stem dead. Well, we're joined now by our London reporter, Alice Porter, who's been covering this appeal. And it seems that they're supporting that original decision of the High Court.
Yes, that's right. 3 Court of Appeal judges have made that decision, and that reinforces the original decision that was made by Mr Justice Hayden. So Andrew McFarlane, who's the most senior family court judge in the land for England and Wales, he said that Archie has shown no signs to medical staff of any signs of life, and that all his bodily functions are being artificially maintained, and therefore all 3 court judges ruled that doctors can lawfully stop providing life support treatment to Archie Battersby. Now, of course, that is not what the family wanted at all. This has been a legal battle that's been going on for a number of months now. Now, I was speaking to Holly Dance, who's the mother of Archie Battersby, outside the court, and she gave her reaction to the news today.
We realise that we are coming to an end now, but like I said from day one, I will fight to get my little boy a time. I just think it's a shame that the whole family and close friends have had to go through all of this traumatic experience, to do it. If it comes down to funding, the amount of that it's taken or cost the NHS to take us to court and go through these proceedings, they could have kept Archie on a ventilator, no questions asked, for 6 months.
That was Holly Dance, the mother of Archie Battersby, speaking to me there. Now, the question is, where does this leave the family now? Now, there is a possibility it could go back to the High Court, because the barristers who are representing the Battersby family said that there is allegedly new evidence that they've seen over the weekend that Archie has been able to breathe on his own twice, and therefore they're going to be putting that forward and hoping that the case could go back to the High Court. There's also the possibility, if that is unsuccessful, they may try the European Court of Human Rights, but they would have to make a decision on that very, very imminently. And I think one thing that was very striking today is the mental, emotional and physical toll that this is taking on the family. The father of Archie Battersby actually had to be taken to hospital today from court of a suspected stroke or heart attack, and that was something that Holly Dance, the mother of Archie Battersby, was at pains to say, that this has been incredibly stressful for all those involved, and unfortunately I don't think that stress in any way is going to be stopping any anytime soon. They've said many times that they will be taking this court case as far as possible because they believe that their son is, they want to make the decision about when his life ends, and they do not want to have the life support machine switched off, which so far is what all the High Court judges have ruled and said that that should happen.
Appeal Court, thank you very much indeed for that. And of course, keep us updated on how Dad's getting on as well. Very upsetting news there, but thanks very much indeed. Let's get the reaction of Norman, still with us in the studio, to what's been decided. And, you know, we ought to reinforce the fact that the court's position, it's duty-bound to make decisions in the interest of the child.
Yes, that's precisely right. And they've clearly looked at matters carefully. I understand, of course, why the family is unhappy with the conclusions reached. Who can not sympathise with the family in this situation? Because there's something very unnatural, I think, about a child predeceasing his or her mother and father, and I totally understand why they want to explore every last avenue. But the courts will, as you say, Mark, look at the evidence, the medical evidence. We haven't got that in front of us, but if the medical evidence is it's not in the child's interest to be maintained in that condition, then that's what it's being concluded.
Yeah, but that awful thing that even if the decision is accepted by the family and gives the doctors the wherewithal, they still have to make the decision as to when to switch off his life support system, which is just...
Well, I mean, look, it won't be easy for anyone in the hospital. I mean, this is a terrible situation to put a doctor or a nurse in. You're just ending someone's life, and people go into medical care to save lives. So nobody will be enjoying this at all. It's a very, very painful moment for everybody.
Yeah, do no harm, of course. Yes, indeed. Thanks very much for the moment, Norman, and we'll keep you updated, of course, on how Dad is getting on with that news that we heard there at the appeal court. Also coming up, turning to our debate to ask, is retirement affordable anymore? New data suggesting the cost of living crisis could force older people back to the workplace. There's a thought. First, let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines. I'm Polly.
Mark, thank you. As you've been hearing, appeal court judges say they'll put on hold ending 12-year-old Archie Battersby's life-saving treatment for 48 hours to allow his parents time to approach the European Court. Judges had previously ruled doctors could lawfully stop his life support treatment, which his parents had appealed against. Archie hasn't regained consciousness since suffering an accident at home several months ago. His mother, Holly Dance, says she'll fight on for her son.
I said to the nurse on shift at the time, which is quite funny because apparently she hasn't seen anything, and according to the response of the hospital today, I turned around and said to the nurse, "Did you see that?" She went, "I did see that." She then come over and shook. She said, "Oh, maybe there's water in it," so shook the ventilator. Archie continued the breaths, so it was clearly nothing to do with water.
In other news, an independent review has found Cricket Scotland to be institutionally racist. The report by consultancy firm Plan for Sport cites 448 examples and failings in 29 out of 31 indicators. Cricket Scotland's entire board resigned before the report's publication, saying it would now allow new structures to be created to implement the recommendations. The final two candidates to become Prime Minister and Tory party leader will face their first televised head-to-head debate tonight. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss have been trading blows over political hot potatoes like immigration, China and tax cuts over the weekend. The Foreign Secretary and the former Chancellor are both vowing to toughen immigration controls. Now, some of the UK's major cities are bidding to host the Eurovision Song Contest for 2023. Sheffield, Manchester and London all announcing their intentions to apply after Britain was asked to replace Ukraine. Boris Johnson says the event will definitely celebrate the Ukrainian people. Earlier this year, the UK was runner-up to the Ukrainian entry, which was won by Kalush Orchestra. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. Brazier is back with Mark Longhurst after the break.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Quick snapshot for you on today's markets. The pound is 1.204 to the dollar and the euro is 1.179 to the pound. If you want to buy an ounce of gold, you'll have to fork out £1,424.12.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, standing in for Colin all this week. And this is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with, surprise, surprise, your thoughts on whether Boris should return as Prime Minister. Julia first. Boris needs to come back right now. At the end of this year, we are going to be in a very dire situation, she says. Putin is now basically in control of energy and food. No way Truss or Sunak will manage that issue the way that Boris can. Bring him back, please, she adds. Pauline, meanwhile, says if Boris comes back, the Tories are guaranteed an election win. If not, they are down the pan. People like myself will not vote since our last vote for Boris has been ignored. I think that point being made by many people, actually, while Barbara says it's ludicrous, but not quite as mad as Trump returning as president. But if the membership makes that error, I despair. I don't dislike Boris, but his self-congratulatory boasting without acknowledging his mistakes isn't acceptable. It's time for something more serious. Marianne says, it would not surprise me if Boris came back in the future. He is hugely popular and positive. His major flaw is he put too much faith and trust in the wrong people, like Gove and Sunak. He has made mistakes, but haven't we all? He's a natural leader that people want to follow, whether the opposition or media like it or not. Keep them coming, of course. We'll reflect your views as ever. But time now for the debate this hour, with new data from the Office for National Statistics suggesting that the cost of living crisis could be forcing retired people back into the workplace. Now, in the past year, there's been an increase of 116,000 over 50s in or actually looking for work, while more than half of those are men aged over 65. So we're asking, is retirement affordable anymore? Well, still with us in the studio, Norman Baker, and also joining us, online editor of The Critic magazine, Sebastian Milbank. Sebastian, I'll go to you first, because I think you're suggesting that maybe the old E's, if I can put it that way, have had it pretty good already. So why should we actually help many more?
Well, yes. I mean, we all sympathise with anyone of whatever age facing financial difficulty, but I think we have to put this in proportion. 18% of pensioners live in poverty. That's terrible. But consider that 31% of children are currently living in poverty. And that one of the highest predictors for poverty is being a child or having a child. And you also have to consider that over 65s account for over half of UK housing wealth. And even if you consider the very poorest pensioners, 90% of them, that's 90% of the very poorest pensioners own their own home, which means that unlike children living in poverty, they have options in a time of crisis. They also have a triple locked pension. So even though the uplift was slightly lower in relation to inflation this year, they nevertheless enjoyed considerably more state spending than almost any sector of the economy, including...
Right. Sebastian, let me just pick you up. They haven't got the triple lock at the moment, and that's one of the problems, of course, on the state pension, although it's promised it will be back. And, of course, a lot of them are saying that their private pensions, which are coming from the market, have really plunged 20% or so they're not exactly splashing the cash.
No, but you've got to consider they're starting from a far higher base. And I don't think that a mere 3.2% increase compared to inflation is at all bad. You also have to consider that even in years where inflation was low, bear in mind, triple lock is not just inflation; it's also keeps up with wages. And if wages and inflation aren't sufficiently high, it has a floor of 2.5%. So this has been a very good deal. Pensioners are not having to sort of suffer for 1 year. Wage earners have been having to suffer for every year previously.
OK, Norman, let's just reflect on perhaps how worried pensioners are, because despite those figures, they're looking at the potential rise in fuel this autumn and winter and literally wondering, can we eat or heat?
Well, I should declare an interest in I'm 65 tomorrow, so I'm going to be one of these people who's falling into this category. And I make that point because actually I agree that, relatively speaking, pensioners have been better protected by successive governments than have young people. And there's a very simple reason for that. Older people tend to vote, and young people don't, and politicians respond to those who vote. Now, of course, there are pensioners who are poor, and there are pensioners who are on the breadline, and pensioners need support. But, on the question of fuel, for example, the winter fuel allowance is still there, and there are people who are pensioners, British pensioners living in the south of Spain, who are getting a winter fuel allowance. It's not very carefully discriminated. You've got the triple lock, which, OK, has been abandoned temporarily, but is still there. You've got free bus passes for elderly people, which I think is a good idea, but there aren't such passes for young people. So I think we need to recalibrate our society a bit and bear in mind that young people nowadays, people like my daughter, who's 22, are going to be the first generation who are going to be poorer than their parents.
Yeah, and Sebastian, let me put one other point. A lot of people who are retired say, look, we paid an awful lot of national insurance over the years to actually get our pension, and clearly, we're not able to survive given all the cost of living increase. Are you going to cut them some slack?
Well, you hear this a lot. I've paid in my whole life, except it isn't true. I think people often have the impression that national insurance is all going in some big pot, like a private pension fund. That's not true. Public pensions, state pensions, are paid directly out of taxation. That means that all of the taxes that people were paying in during their working lives, all of that was going directly to the services they were using within their own lifetime. It was not going into some kind of theoretical...
Well, no, part of the contract was that you'd get your state pension at the end of it. That was part of the contract.
Well, I mean, part of the social contract is that your children do better than you do, and that's clearly not happened. I think part of the social contract is your children can afford a house, and that hasn't happened. So I don't think they're the only ones losing out on the social contract here.
Right, OK, social contract at the moment, out the window. But thank you very much indeed, Sebastian, for your views, and Norman. And we wish you happy birthday for tomorrow, Norm, but you won't still have a pension for another year.
I should just, can I just add that pensions are brought in by the Liberal government.
Oh, there we are.
In 1906, which is even before Liz Truss was a Liberal.
1911, I seem to think.
1906, I think it was.
Oh, right, okay.
Well, the 1906 government.
No. Thank you all very much, and again, happy birthday. Now, let's move on to the reports this afternoon that the Queen, Her Majesty, has invited, yes, Harry and Meghan, to visit her Balmoral this summer in what's being seen as a move to improve relations with the couple. Harry last seeing his grandmum when he and Meghan flew back from California for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Didn't quite go, perhaps, according to plan. News of the Balmoral visit coming after police were called out twice, we're being told, to Harry and Meghan's mansion in California after the intruder alarms went off. Maybe they were palace officials, who knows? That was a joke, by the way. We're joined now by royal biographer Angela Lemon. At least you're laughing, Angela. Thank you for joining us once more. Great to see you. Would this be, I assume, a private visit without all the paraphernalia that goes with it?
I'm very worried about it, actually.
Ooh.
Having read that William, Catherine, Charles and Camilla will not be there, and that they will be there on their own. I don't know whether that's what Harry has insisted on or whether that's what the Queen wants to do.
Yes, because normally Charles and Camilla go to Burke Hall, don't they, which is the Queen Mum's old place.
But she's always surrounded by quite a few family, and I, being rather suspicious, I feel that Harry could actually take advantage of not having many of the family there and persuade her to do all sorts of photographs, let them go into all sorts of rooms.
Well, Gran wasn't wearing it last time, was she? She wasn't allowing a private photographer to come in and take Lilibet's photo.
No, she didn't, but the place was full of aides then.
Right.
And she was backed up. I think during the holiday there are less aides there, and I think if Harry or Meghan or started shouting that this is what they wanted and this is what the Queen wants, I think she could give in because she is vulnerable. She's much more vulnerable.
Because the Duke of Edinburgh's not there, for instance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Jubilee was something else because it was something to do with the country and all that. This is her on holiday, and I fear they will take advantage of it.
But you can't blame her, because she's not only, you know, the Queen of the realm, she's a great-grandmother at the head of the family and maybe wants to see the babies and the kids.
Yes, I'm sure that's right, but I'm also concerned about it. And I hope it would go very well, but I can't imagine them coming and being up there. Unless they're doing a documentary, I really can't see it.
Norman, I'm going to light the blue touch paper from the Times. I know your views sometimes on the royals, but how do you read this?
I wonder whether Harry and William don't want to be in the same room. That might be part of the explanation for it. But can I just pick up on the point that was also made about these two intruders in California? Because I've always found it rather strange that Harry seems to be worried about the security and safety of his family in this country.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be far more worried of being in America, quite frankly.
Yeah, because we're told it's Santa Barbara police force that has to answer these things when they go off. There's no sort of private security detail, as we understand.
Yes, it's exactly right. I mean, it seems ridiculous that they're spending time and money trying to sort it out in the UK. And really what some people feel is that they want this country to pay for them to have round-the-clock attention.
When they visit here,
not just when they visit here,
okay.
all round, anywhere they go, so that they don't have to pay for it themselves. And I think that's also rather tricky, I'm afraid. It's very difficult.
So tricky, we might have to invite you back again to talk about it. Lovely to see you. And Angela, thank you for coming in, and Norman's views as well. But let's just bring you some very important news. It's been confirmed that the Eurovision Song Contest will take place in the UK next year. Yes, the show's organisers deciding the event could not be held in the winning country, Ukraine, of course, for obvious reasons, due to the ongoing war after the Russian invasion. So the UK, yes, remember, we came second in this year's competition. Well, let's speak now to our showbiz journalist, Ellie Phillips. And Ellie, of course, it's not by default as such. We are really in the right place to do this.
Absolutely, like you said, Sam Ryder for the UK came second in Turin this year, with Kalush Orchestra obviously winning the Eurovision for Ukraine, which was, the best thing that could happen. Not only were they great performers, it also showed support. And now we're in the situation where it's just not really safe or feasible to have the competition in Ukraine in 2023 amid the ongoing Russian invasion. And so the agreement has been made now that the UK will host it. The BBC are going to broadcast the competition on behalf of Ukrainian broadcaster UAPBC. And they basically said that the EBU, so it's the European Broadcasting Union, they've said that it's going to be, the contest won't be in Ukraine, but it will be in support of Ukraine. And there's very much a feeling that it's going to be this joint effort to really showcase Ukrainian spirit in this event and throughout.
So do we know if the Ukrainians will have a say as to where it'll actually be based in the UK then?
I don't know if they will, but if they do, I'm going to pitch out there. I do think they should pick Liverpool. I mean, I might be slightly biased. I might be slightly biased, being a Scouser, but I do think that as the capital of music, it makes perfect sense to have it in Liverpool. You've got the Beatles, you've got a thriving music scene. We were previously capital of culture. We've got the Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts. You've got Anfield Stadium if you want to have it there, which, we just hosted Elton John there. So I just think, it makes sense. And also Liverpool is so attuned to holding these enormous events. We've got the Liverpool International Music Festival, Sound City, the Grand National, and the facilities are there. And I think one of the conversations that are happening today about, the Eurovision, the UK hosting it, is that it does cost a lot of money. The BBC is saying that they are going to broadcast it, but it can cost between 10 and 20 million to put this thing on, and everyone's like, where's that money coming from? However, whichever city does become the host city is just going to thrive because of this. It's a huge boost for tourism. Think about all the hotels, all the bars, all the restaurants, because we might think of Eurovision as this one-day event, but actually it's a whole week build up, and even more than that, in the lead up. So much goes on. So I think whatever the outgoing initial cost will just be reaped back in full, whichever city, hopefully Liverpool, is lucky enough to get it.
Yeah, I mean, the cavern may be a bit too small nowadays, but I mean, it'd be levelling up in one fell swoop, wouldn't it, to get it to Liverpool?
Exactly. And I think one of the big things that's we're hearing on social media and things like that is that people want it outside of London. And I think that is right. I don't think it should be London-centric. I think we should showcase the rest of the UK, wherever that may be. And that will be interesting. And also the question is, who's going to host it? Because the last time we had the Eurovision in the UK was back in 1998. Over 20 years ago, and we had Terry Wogan, the late Terry Wogan, and Ulrika Johnson. They hosted it. And now we're kind of like, okay, who would it be? I actually think it would be great if we had someone like Davina McCall or Vic Hope, because they both are fluent in French. And traditionally with the Eurovision, it's presented in English and French. So I think that could make a lot of sense. But also in the running, you've got Graham Norton, Dermot O'Leary, Ryland. They've all been massively part of the Eurovision family in the previous years building up to this. So it'll be really interesting to see who lands that. It's a huge, huge gig to be hosting that.
Ellie, as ever, thank you for that. And I should say merci beaucoup, I suppose, for that. And we'll see what happens with Liverpool and the Mersey beat. Thanks very much. Coming up next, Dubes and Co. Michelle is here in the studio. What's coming up with you, Michelle?
Hello, Mark. Yeah, I've got to be honest, I've been doing my best to avoid talking about Eurovision, quite frankly. The talk about week-long build-up to that, oh, gosh, I'll put myself under my duvet for that week, that is for sure. What I do want to talk about, though, is the NHS. Yet another day, yet another worrying report, Mark, this time about the state of the workforce, so I'll be looking at that. Also, a topic that really caught my eye as a mum to a 2-year-old, Stonewall. We'll all be familiar with that organisation. They reckon that 2-year-olds can tell if they are trans, and they've called on nurseries to consider adding trans-inclusive material. I have to say, I really do want to debate whether that's a good idea or not. And also, MPs, does it matter if they're from the working class, yes or no? My audience will tell me their thoughts on that for sure, Mark, in just a couple of minutes.
Michelle, thanks very much indeed for that. Norman, still with us. Quick thought. Boris Johnson as MC of Eurovision, of course, all those Ukraine contacts. He'd be a great hit in Ukraine, wouldn't he?
The Ukrainians would like it, yes. He's very much a Marmite figure. I'm not sure that's who we want. But listen, I'm going to support Liverpool. Liverpool's a brilliant city.
Yeah, OK. Thank you, as ever, for being with us and for all your thoughts today. That's all the time we've got for today, I'm afraid. You've been with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin today. Back at 4 tomorrow. Up next, Dubes and Co. First, the weather for you.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Showers today will ease overnight with clear spells. It will be a cool night and then a better chance of sunny spells and many places staying dry on Tuesday. Low pressure has been drifting into Scandinavia through the day, but around that low, a weather front has brought some lively downpours to eastern Scotland, into northern England as well, and those showers or even longer spells of rain will push south overnight, eventually easing, but still Further showers to come for northwest England into North Wales, the Midlands and East Anglia by the end of the night. A lot of cloud in this zone as well. Showers also continue to arrive into the northwest of Scotland, the north coast of Northern Ireland. In between, some clear spells and temperatures in some sheltered spots dipping to 5 to 8 Celsius. So a fresh start to Tuesday, but for many it's a dry and bright start, a legacy of cloud across northern, central and southern England. That may take some time to break up, but it will break up, and then by the afternoon, increasingly sunny spells developing in many places. Still a few showers around, especially central areas and the north of Scotland, but away from the showers, feeling pleasant in the sunshine. High teens, low 20s in the north, 22 to 25 Celsius in the south. Tuesday evening then sees plenty of dry and bright weather until the sun